Well, here's where I left off last time. Got the wheel wells cleaned up, and I uncovered some rust in the driver's side wheel well. The wheel well rust went into the trunk. I scraped away the seam sealer, and I sanded around the area, and we'll address this from the trunk side in a few days. I sanded the areas where there was some surface rust, and I also sanded the areas where the holes were drilled through the trunk pan, and then I coated the area with primer. Here's the area where I had the rust through, and I eliminated all the loose rust. I neutralized the existing rust, and then I encapsulated it. I'll come back to the trunk and start working on it some more in a few days. After grinding and sanding in the wheel wells and in the trunk, I've just created so much dust that I'm trashing my engine compartment in the Trans Am, and I need to do something to try to keep from turning it into a complete disaster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover it up with plastic, and I'm going to hope that when I continue to work on the bottom of the car that dust doesn't come up from the bottom of the car into the engine compartment, and at least the dust that's floating around in the environment doesn't settle down into the engine compartment, because I put a lot of work into it. I want to keep it nice. I made up a patch for the rust spot in the wheel well, and I know the most correct way to do it would be to cut a patch to fit and fit it in the hole and weld it, but you know, it's a driver, and I don't have forever, and I want to get this thing done, and so I'm just going to weld the patch over the rust spot, and I'll put a little bit of seam sealer on there, and when I put undercoating in the wheel well, well, then you won't even see it. You won't even know it's there. And I'm just going to spot weld the patch in place. You know, I don't need to seal weld the patch. I'm going to use seam sealer to seal it up. And then undercoating over the top of that will be just fine. All right, good enough. It's going to serve its purpose, and it'll be just fine. And let's move on. After spot welding the patch in place, I now have it covered in red oxide primer. I've cleaned the bottom of the car in the fuel tank area, and I have that area all primed now. I also have the wheel wells primed. The trunk extension panel on the driver's side was rusty for a couple inches around the drain hole. I cut away the rusty metal and then trimmed a new panel to fit. The trunk extension panel is close to the outer skin of the quarter panel, so I decided not to chance welding in the panel. So what I did is I used panel adhesive. I applied a generous amount of panel adhesive to the patch panel and then just pressed it in place. And I had quite a bit of excess come out around the panel, and I just smeared that with my finger to make sure it had a good seal and wasn't going to leak. Now it's time to address the spot in the trunk pan that rusted through. And what I'm going to do here is maybe not textbook, but I'm going to use fiberglass to patch this up. I have a couple reasons for deciding to do this. First of all, I couldn't find anyone who sold a patch panel for just that area. I had to buy the entire trunk pan, and I just didn't want to do that. That was just an incredible waste. And secondly, I would have had to drill all the spot welds out of the subframe, cut the area, and then try to fit in a replacement panel. I'm under a little self-imposed pressure to get this done, get this car back on its feet and running again. And I know I've said it a few times, I'm coming up on 65. I need to finish this car, and I still need to finish my Rally 350, so I just got to get this stuff done. Doing a fiberglass repair here will just take a few hours, whereas if I try to weld in a piece of floor pan, that would take me days. And this is going to be a good repair. It's going to be strong and it's going to last. The first step in making this fiberglass repair was to cut a piece of fiberglass cloth, the appropriate size, and next I misted some 3M77 adhesive to one side of the cloth. And when this 3M77 tacks up, it'll allow me to place the cloth wherever I choose, and I'll be able to manipulate it, and when working overhead, that's going to be pretty handy. The weave of the fiberglass cloth allows me to form the cloth to the compound curves that I'm covering, and I can do this without wrinkling the cloth, so I can get a nice tight fit. Doing a repair like this kind of goes back to the original mission of this car, which was to be a rattle can restoration, and this is a quality repair. Now, I cleaned all the loose rust off, and then I neutralized the rust, and then I sealed it. So when I do this fiberglass patch here, it's going to bond tightly to the metal, and I'm not going to have any problems with this. Once I have my cloth shaped and applied to the area I want to repair, I can then just take a single edge razor blade and trim away the excess cloth. Once the cloth was in place, I then mixed up some fiberglass resin, and I coated the area with resin, making sure I got good penetration into the glass weave, and I just let it set up overnight, and I was ready to move on the next day. I'll show you what I have done so far. I have both wheel wells done, and I have the bottom done in the fuel tank area, and actually the metal here is in pretty good shape. I had that rust spot in the extension panel, and I had the rust through area in the trunk pan, but other than that, the metal's in pretty good condition. I scraped and resealed the seams. And, you know, these cars, when they were new, they weren't painted on the bottom. They were delivered in red oxide primer. So this is actually the finish coat. And what I'll do in the areas of the extension panels, those will get undercoated. The wheel wells will get undercoated. Part areas of the rear valance will get undercoated. The fiberglass patch we put in for the trunk pan, that will also get undercoated, so that'll be invisible. And, you know, so far, shaping up pretty good. It's kind of a slow process. It's dirty, but I think it'll be worth it when it's done. All right. So, going over to this side of the car, I've yet to sand the subframe, so it doesn't have any primer on it yet. And, you know, I have a sheet of 80 grit there, and then I'll scuff it real good with that before priming it. And the patch I welded in, I sealed it with some body panel adhesive, and then of course it's been primed. And all this in here is going to be undercoated. So some of the little imperfections there you see, they'll be all covered up. And again, you know, the bottom looks pretty good. I installed this new inner panel here, this trunk extension panel. And, you know, I cut out the rusty piece and put in the new panel. I had to glue it in with panel adhesive because it's too close to the outer skin, and I was afraid that if I spot welded it in, that I would damage the paint, and I don't want to do that. So I glued it in with panel adhesive. Well, it's not too bad. It's not too bad a condition. There's a couple spots that need to be addressed, but overall it just needs a cleaning, scuffing with some sandpaper, and then, you know, hit it with some primer. Well, thank you for watching. I'm trying to work on this a little bit every day, so it should move forward. And I hope you join me again and check out the next video.